not. And then the boundary confusion, a common one, the mix-up, because we're called to be emotionally responsible, but the big mix-up is what I want you guys to discuss, is we're called to be responsible to and responsible for, but what does that mean? So what I want you to, and then we ended last week with, if our whole upbringing was our emotional classroom, that as we talked about what we could say, are some principles about boundaries, once you guys started asking questions and giving answers and so on, we certainly found out something that we're supposed to find out, and that is the subject of boundaries is super personal. Like in a way, it tells our story. Depending on how we do boundaries, how we don't do boundaries, certainly as we reflect in a moment about how our families did boundaries, like our story is told through this subject. And so, did you feel it in the air last week when we were talking about certain things? It was really helpful to hear you guys kind of reflect and ask and wonder and all that. I loved it. So as we kind of just complete this kind of review portion, when it comes to property line, where I end and you begin, and our example, as I said before, was Bob and Hank last week. What is it that's important? What strikes you as important about us understanding that boundaries is like a clarification of where the property line is? Why is that important? What's that?
It doesn't fester.
Say it again?
It doesn't fester.
Okay, so then when property lines are unclear, then we might have what Bob and Hank experienced, which is not a mutual understanding of where the line needs to be. And so then we'd say, like we said with Bob and Hank, although they ended up trying to kill each other, we'd say, oh, but they didn't have a relationship problem, that they had a property line problem, right? And so we reflect definitely on, we think boundaries are clear just by virtue of us just never paying attention to it. And we find out, wow, very often without clarification on boundaries, there's actually a pretty high likelihood that someone's crossing a line or is experiencing a boundary line being crossed. Lack of communication, lack of clarification, lack of and sometimes this, we think we're being a good neighbor, if we're talking about kind of boundaries, Bob and Hank, sometimes being a neighbor is being a spouse. We're in a relationship, we're a neighbor, and then we have the other. And so sometimes we think, as long as it's feeling good for me, I don't have to check in on anything. And so sometimes that can be a relationship problem and a boundary problem, because we may not really be thinking, when I talk to young people about this kind of stuff, I teach them that we're meant to have two kinds of radar screens. Radar screen number one is, do I know what I feel? Am I aware of my own experience? In a way, we'd say this property line issue, this idea of having a boundary is, do I know myself well enough to have self-awareness? Do I know what I'm feeling? Do I know what I want? Do I know how I feel when something happens? That's radar screen number one. Radar screen number two, this one's like vitally important. Number one is foundationally important. Number two, radar screen number two, what's the second radar? That I have a radar where I have some sense of insight on how other people experience me. Radar screen number two would be, I have some sense of what they're experiencing. I have a sense, and even this, I even care about what's going on for them. That's radar screen number two. Awareness here, awareness there. Awareness here in my feelings, awareness in how they're experiencing me or what they're feeling. So even just with talking about basic two radars, we almost have the whole boundary story, which is, do I have awareness of what's important for me? Do I have awareness of what's going on for someone else? So with that, we have a little bit of a property line clarification. Neighbors end up being good neighbors, not only because they take care of their property, but they really care about definition number 2 defines a sense of responsibility. Remember our example last week of the parents with the 25-year-old son? You guys had a lot of good things to say about that. Why is it important that we have clarification of what's mine to carry and what's not mine to carry? Well, let me put it this way. When we're not clear on what's mine to carry, what's not mine to carry, what kind of boundary problem do we end up with? Okay, we might have no boundary. What else would we might end up with if we're not clear on what's mine to carry, what's not mine to carry? What's that?
Carry too much.
Okay, so you really, it's going to be like, okay, like that's going to automatically be even. Oh, look, you're carrying every bit of your load. I'm carrying every bit of my load. Magic. This is like amazing that we never even thought about it or talked about it, and we're carrying exactly the load we're supposed to? No. Usually, it's the discovery that someone's carrying too much, and then that, just by virtue of how many things are left to carry, means that the other person isn't carrying enough. Okay? And here we have a lot of chemistry. I've spoken to you guys about that before, that sometimes there's even chemistry, like attraction chemistry, in what we'd say under-responsible people are attracted to over-responsible people, and over-responsible people love to be needed, so they're attracted to under-responsible people. And the attraction, even like sexual attraction, physical attraction, chemistry, because there's a lot of chemistry in we complete each other. ... in a horrifically sick way. Okay? But we don't figure that out until like 10 or 12 years into marriage, so that's cool. That's no problem, yeah. Didn't read that in the contract. So, but that's how chemistry can go sometimes, and sometimes we just go, ooh, I feel it, therefore it must be right, and we're not using the wisdom of boundaries or clarification of, wow, I might be attracted, but do we get each other when it comes to sort of being equals, and what's your load to carry, what's my load to carry? Now, that gets us into responsible to, responsible for. Help me, remind me, help teach me, teach us all. What's our clarification on responsible to and responsible for, and how's that supposed to work? And when it doesn't, what happens? Okay, so the whole enabler thing. So what's it mean? So how's it supposed to, who are we supposed to be responsible to, and who are we supposed to be responsible for?
First of all, ourselves.
Okay, so this is a biggie, right? So we are responsible, it sounds so basic, but so missed. We're responsible for ourselves. We're responsible for our responsibilities. We're responsible for our, and this is a biggie in the emotional world, we're responsible for our mood. We're responsible for our attitude. We're responsible for our actions. Okay? Now, who's that? When you're thinking about like, oh my gosh, that's important to me, that I understand that I'm responsible for myself. Who would that be super important for? Who might, what kind of spouse or what kind of relationship person may not know that they're responsible for themselves? Tell me about that person. We just reminded them, so now they're going to work on it, but they don't totally always easily remember that they're responsible for their own mood or for their own attitude or for their own behavior. And when they're not very good at remembering that, tell me about that person. How do they do life usually? Yeah, so they're looking for someone else to make them happy. What's also common, they blame. So when I'm not happy, then, oh my gosh, you blew it again. Can't you see that I'm now all, pissy, whatever you want to call that? Why did you do that to me? See? Wow. So just that boundary of the clarity of how we are responsible for our own mood, for our own emotional process. Right? When it comes to, and so it's interesting because what we just said there is, it could be sort of the insensitive person and maybe the controlling person that holds other people responsible for let's say, their their bad mood, right? But also, the responsible for can also be, I'm not a complete, I can't be happy unless other people like me. So then I'm not responsible for how I feel. Some people can even be circumstances will determine if I'm happy or not. And so that's a guaranteed mood disorder. When your well-being is believed to be something that happens outside of you. If how happy you can be is determined by things outside of you, interestingly enough, that's how the pagans believed. Pagan thought would be, that's why they prayed all the time to the rain gods and to the whatever gods, because their worship was, we need everything to go well, and then I can be okay. And so when we have our well-being outside of us, that's idolatry. When we have well-being outside of us in modern terms, that's addiction. And so again, we're just like rallying around this, mixed up on responsible for. Now, if we find ourselves with lack of well-being, and we notice certain things aren't going well, I mean, certainly we see the relationship, something is going yucky over here and I feel yucky. That's not strange. But I want to just make the point that if our thinking ends there and simply goes into, and the only way I can get better is when that gets better, that's the problem I'm talking about. Certainly we get affected by negative things and it bums us out. But I'm talking about well-being. If it stops there, the idea, and I'd even say this, the idea of having an inner life is for this very purpose, that well-being can happen in your inner life even when your outer life is not cooperating. Then I take it a step further, it's the whole point of having what happens in the inner life. What happens in there? Hello? Oh. A spiritual life happens in your inner life. Wow. So even part of having a spiritual life is meant to be distinctly different than the pagans that make sure they control everything they can to have their life all put together. Where we would say, wow, the path of the spiritual life is interior, and that we find our well-being, as we quoted St. John Chrysostom a few weeks ago, where he says, when you find the gate to the heart, that's when you find the gate to the kingdom of heaven. So it's in this interior life that we find that our life is not just driven by circumstances and our well-being. Now, responsible to. We're responsible for ourselves. We're responsible to what? So this is the other side of the coin. We're responsible to our partners. We're responsible to our relationships. I'm responsible to be honest. I'm responsible to be faithful. I'm responsible to be available. I'm being responsible to my relationships, not for my relationships, but to my relationships. I'm responsible. So you get that distinction? So sometimes if we took the kind of like, broken down version of responsible to and responsible for, or even the mixed up version of responsible to and responsible for, as we said, the responsible for person would be carrying everybody's backpack, feeling responsible for everything and blamed for everything. The person who has the mix up on responsible to is really good, like, and they can use boundary language too. They're really slick. Oh, sorry, that's crossing a boundary. That's not my job. And what they're saying is not their job falls in the category of responsible to. It's not my job to communicate with you, or to be available to you, or to be honest with you. So the person who sort of falters on the responsible to doesn't have to really show up to the relationship. So the idea of responsible to is, man, there's a ton of responsibility in this relationship life. But you got to be carrying the right ton. I'm responsible to be authentic in my marriage. I'll even say this, and the final segment that's happening in our final 4 weeks is called Created for Connection. So we're going to talk about a lot of the relationship stuff there. One of the things we're going to talk about is vulnerability. One of the most unused natural resources in relationship life. We run from it. We're afraid of it. We're almost taught that it's a bad thing. And yet, I'd even say, when we understand really what it is to be vulnerable, we're meant to be responsible to our partner by showing up in a vulnerable way. Okay, so we're working through this clarity of responsible to, responsible for. And then we have the good old emotional classroom. What did you guys think about that little analogy? Did that get you thinking? Right? So we're going to springboard from emotional classroom to what we're calling the family system. Have you ever heard that term, family system, or studying psychology a little bit, right? So here's the image. Remember those in elementary school used to make those with sticks and string? What's that called? Mobile, right? So this is how we understand the family system. What's true about a mobile? Okay, it has to have balance. And what else is true about if you move one part of a mobile, what happens? It all moves. You just entered a psychology class on family system psychology. When one part of the family moves, the whole family moves. When you have something shaking the family, the whole family feels it. So we're going to take a look at that tonight and spend much of our time talking about the family system. Okay. Now let me just ask you just off the top. When we think about a family shaking, this mobile moving, and we can even begin to look at this family mobile, when we think about just, and I'm going to go into some detail on this, but when you think about the family shaking, what comes to mind? What shakes the family? Divorce. So divorce in this family would shake the family. What else would shake the family?
Yeah, what's the problem?
What's that?
What's the problem? And the family shakes the family. The problem with the family shakes the
Yes.
family.
Yeah, so some problem enters the family, the whole family feels it, right? Yeah. Okay, so some kind of like volatility in emotions would shake the family. Yeah. Okay, so a death in the family shakes the family enough. Interesting, and we'll get into this. Interesting on all these examples, it's not only the occurrence of exactly what you said, it's also then what happens. Like, how does the family deal with that? Like, the death shakes the family, but how the family deals with death tells the story of the family. When there's a problem in the family, that shakes the family. How the family deals with problems tells the story of the family. When there's divorce in the family, that shakes the family. How the family deals with divorce. When somebody's yelling a lot in the family, that shakes the family. How does the family deal with the yelling? Okay, so I want us thinking like, wow, this family system really starts giving us insight on not only what occurs, but what we do about it when it occurs. We can even say in the parenting world, when I have a difficult child, that shakes the family. But how do we deal with that difficult child? See, so it's all of these, like, one thing to recognize what's shaking it. In a way, we'd say the true colors of a family shows up in how they respond to it. Okay? All right, so what I'd like to do, and I know this is not a perfect thing, but I'm glad Father Pete and Matthew bought me this bigger board. We're gonna draw on it. And I'm gonna do my best, and you guys are gonna squint your best. Because what I want us to do is look at the family system. And I want to mention, as I'm doing a little bit of drawing, and we're going to draw Dad here. And we got Mom over here. We'll put a few kids. We may add some as we go. Remember Gumby? Remember the old show Gumby? Yeah, Gumby's in this family right there. Okay. Okay, we'll start with this. And what's interesting about the family as a system, prior to what they call family system psychology, psychology did not factor in the family at all. And in the I may have mentioned this to somebody, but I can't remember. But somewhere around the 1950s, they accidentally, men are home from the war. There was zero insight on post-traumatic stress disorder. So a lot of the men who came home actually came home with PTSD and all kinds of trauma. What then occurred in the 1950s was both prosperity, which our country I think is into getting prosperous after wars. That kind of trips me out. But anyway, you got prosperous after the war, so you had money and you had unresolved issues. So what did that lead to? Therapeutically, what that led to, and statistically what that led to, is the highest rate of alcoholism in our country up to that point. So, and then if I flash the picture of, on Netflix, if you watch Mad Men, remember that show Mad Men? So that would even be an example of like the classic 2-hour cocktail lunch. So not only were they drinking because they had some unresolved issues, it was also because of prosperity, it was really in vogue to just have a ton of cocktails. Right? Yeah.
And I remember for years, it was almost the social acceptable thing to do.
Super socially acceptable, and if you sort of were anybody, you were good on the cocktails.
And if you did participate, you would be like.
Yeah, what's wrong with you? Totally, right? Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, women who had worked because the men were at war lost their jobs.
Oh, interesting. So,
And with that, home. So they lost.
so you might even have some transition and difficulties going on during. Yeah, so during this period, you got alcoholism at its peak. So, how did family systems get discovered by accident? Well, they treated a bunch of alcoholics all over the country, and they did a lot of, sort of further research on, wow, alcoholics doesn't matter if they're rich or poor, black or white, or whatever they are. They have a lot of similarities to one another in terms of alcoholic behavior patterns. And then they treated them, sent them back home to the family. Majority of them relapsed. So then the clinical response to that was, what's going on at home? So then they started studying the family members of the alcoholic. And they discovered, wow, we thought the alcoholics had similar behavior patterns. Family members of alcoholics have similar behavior patterns. Okay? So from that, they came up with, wow, if we're going to understand anybody, we better understand what is going on in their family system. So, that all being said, and us hopefully seeing the board, let's play around with that initial clinical discovery. So in this case, we're going to say, Dad is the alcoholic. And based on our family mobile, what happens? Everybody feels it, right? So let me just, so everybody is feeling. Now, if in this family, let's enter the family for a minute, what kinds of things, when Dad is drinking, in what way does that shake the family, and in what ways do the family members' feelings? What happens there? Yeah?
He loses his job.
Okay, so we might have instability. Okay. Wow, so we could have denial. We don't want all the neighbors to know that Dad's drinking. What else goes on in shaking the family, or how are people impacted by Dad's drinking? Okay, so we might have unavailable. So now we're even saying unavailable in a variety of ways, but even emotional ways, right? And what did he say over here? Absent. Yeah, so we really see that when Dad's drinking, it changes, potentially in this family, in the early studies, we found things like it would change the whole chemistry of the family. And so even not emotionally available, absent, instability hits the family. We might even have, we know this is happening, but in those early studies, guess from all the research, they concluded that this shaking family, once it started dysfunctioning enough with the alcoholic, and all of what happens with that, to the point of whoever said denial and avoidance, they concluded the one way we can say, like, what's the difference between the functional family and dysfunctional? Hey, we all have our problems, but this family's dysfunctioning. What's true about it? They came up with don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. What do you think about that? Now keep in mind, so this might be true about this family, and I'm giving you the first textbook example of what they came up with research on the family system, but even the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. I want you to note that, because on any given day, we can just embody being dysfunctional by falling into not talking, not trusting, not feeling. But let's roll the tape back. We can appreciate why they ended up not talking, trusting, and feeling. Why would some of those family members not want to talk, trust, or feel? Okay, so to say, hey Dad, hey, I know you were, the war was tough, your boss is kind of a jerk, but the way you're throwing the ashtray across the room, it's so not okay. Like, the 11-year-old's going to say that? Right? So the shaking in the family starts sending out signals that it may not be even safe to say what I feel or to share what I think. Yep.
Sometimes the older sibling, male, sometimes model themselves after the father.
Okay, so we have the point being made, something's being modeled here, which among the kids, what do the kids do with it? So, point being made, some will say, oh, it's kind of kick the dog syndrome. Dad's mad, sort of emotionally kicks mom. Older brother is mad, they kick, figuratively speaking, take it out on someone down the pecking order. Or we may have other children in the family saying, oh my gosh, that's what I don't want to be. So we see then this idea, and I'm going to put, everybody's got, so this is a dysfunctioning family. It's not a bad family, it's not bad people. They all have heart. But when the family shakes, how open is the heart allowed to be?
Not at all.
Not at all, or to varying degrees. So then they say, if we're thinking about boundaries as our sense of ourself, we're thinking about boundaries as our personal property line, we're thinking about boundaries as, hey, let's be clear on what's mine to carry, what's not. That's really like the rug's pulled out from that boundary plan. It's like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to help mom stop crying. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get dad in a good mood. Am I going to talk, trust, and feel? Oh my gosh. Ha ha ha, is that a joke? I'm supposed to talk, trust, and feel? Why? Because that's for people who get to live. Here, we have to survive. So we might even say the shaking family goes into survival mode.
And it's not even that you don't trust other people, you start not trusting yourself.
Right, so
Because you're looking around and you're going, okay, am I the crazy one here? What is going on? I know.
So it's really interesting, if you want to watch a super heavy movie, Prince of Tides, I don't know if you remember that one. Woo! I cried like a baby. It was amazing, but really, kind of like shut down the feelings after dad did his tirade and all this kind of stuff. But, so what we see here is so many things. So we'd say, dad is shaking the family. Again, I'm giving classic example of original studies. As we said last week, mom might be the chief enabler. She's going to be at command central to enable dad to not experience consequences to his behavior. Why would she enable him to not experience consequences?
Just trying to stabilize.
Right, so the goal is let's smooth out the shaking. So whatever it is that's like, oh, don't worry, dear, we've got other ashtrays, not a problem. Sally already swept it up, not a big deal. Because why? Because survival mode says, I'm not going to say how I felt about this ashtray going across the room. I'm going to calm it down. Why? Because we all need a break. Yep. Yeah, so,
Easier, softer way, and after time, that becomes the way of life.
very good point.
That's all you know.
So what's being said is that don't talk, don't trust, don't feel can be described as the easier way out. And also you're saying it's all you know. And we have to appreciate context. When there's lots of ideas going on, all this conflict going on, your system can be counterintuitive to say, yeah, I know this might be make you angry, Dad, but I want to share how this is affecting me. Like it feels that would be healthy, but it could be another ashtray.
Well, the other thing is you gotta find him when he's not drunk.
So, right, so then you even say, when does someone talk, trust, and feel, oh, it's Tuesday, or Dad's home, or I read his face, or I saw what he's holding, and now I don't. So we can see from a basic idea of boundaries, which our basic idea of boundaries really is the idea of a balance between self-respect and respect of others. We have a survival mode that is setting a stage to say, how in the world can I trust that system that keeps changing on me? And does it feel safe? Just show up. So that's why these little sweet little beating hearts end up, this is already hurting somehow, and all the hearts get blocked. And this is where we go from development of the person to development of what role they assume. Now let me just mention, and you see it in your notes, I have the term codependent. We've heard that term codependent. It's like super duper, fashionable. It's kind of in to be codependent, by the way. And but the original terminology came from all this research because the alcoholic was known as what? The chemically dependent person. And everybody else was the co-worker to the chemically dependent person. Codependent. So they shook the system. Everybody else was a co-worker to survive and smooth out the system. When it comes to, yeah.
You find that the alcoholic is in, like, say, recovery, that then it's very uncomfortable for the other people in the family because they don't know how to react now.
Right, so remember our mobile and balance? So then when a family finds balance by being out of balance, which is what happens, so now when a family shakes enough, they find their balance around that. And then, and this is outrageous research, in this example, the alcoholic gets sober. Oh, why did he go and do that? And honestly, this is why the codependents need to be in recovery, because now they're out of a job. They feel lost. They might even start like resenting things. They get confused on what they feel because they were trained a certain way. Now notice too, if we're talking about boundary language, they arranged their boundaries the way they needed to, and now someone gets healthy. It's like, oh wait, my perfectly healthy boundaries are comfortable like this. And you're telling me I'm supposed to be my own person? No, speak English. Like what? Like it doesn't translate all the time. Now, let me spend a moment. Yes?
Well, there are other ways that people suffer in this too, because the younger people in the family, their grades in school suffer because they can't do their homework at home and there's problems. And so it's generally not until after they've left home and go on to school that they start getting their grades.
Right, so we'd say, in what way does this trickle down, and what does get compromised? I want us to keep in mind that powerlessness and depression are virtually the same. And if we look at this family system, majority of the family feels powerless. And to feel powerless is a very unnerving feeling. So, to be in this system, what the research shows is that because it's not safe to just be, okay, Johnny's speaking up, he's gonna confront Dad, Sally's gonna say, yeah, Dad, Johnny's right, we really gotta do something about this. Because that doesn't feel safe, but how do Johnny and Sally and Olin show up? Very often they take on what you see in your notes, survival roles. So we might have Johnny being the all-star. Now remember, what's our overarching goal is to smooth out the system? How would Johnny being an all-star help smooth out the system? Please his dad. So if I show up perfect, or like, oh, Dad likes it when I, get triples in baseball or whatever, then wow, I'm smoothing out the system because if I can make Dad happy, then we're all going to be happy. If I can even make him in a good mood, then maybe he doesn't have to drink. Okay? So very often the all-star takes on a very common, socially acceptable kind of persona. But that's not the only kind of survival role. Sometimes we have something very different, which we can call the lost child. The lost child smooths out the system by not making a move, because when they don't make the move, they're not going to add to the shaking. So when we think about that lost child's very different response to the shaking, right? Let me hide, let me be invisible. Now just that point alone, when it comes to our subject of boundaries, like the way I show love is to be invisible. The way I contribute to a relationship is to be the one who never speaks up.
Well, actually, it's more of a survival.
No, it's all survival skills. I'm saying we take the survival skill and translate it into how we end up doing boundaries, right? Then we have various survival roles, and we might have the mascot. The mascot is known like the class clown. How does a mascot usually like the cute one? Right? Oh, very good insight over here. Very good. So not only are they bringing sunshine, but they actually are also known as the distractor. Though I can tell Dad's going to be in a bad mood, this is when I make him laugh, or this is when I start working on Mom to cheer up, or I notice little sister is going to be upset and we start playing and being funny. So very often, again, all-star mode, common, let's say introvert, we'd say, that common, being funny kid, common, but we're not just talking about which kinds of characteristics. We're saying these things emerge as survival roles. They all serve to smooth out the system, sometimes even in some amount of denial, because I'm busy just kind of doing my part. Interestingly, let me mention one other survival role. Known as the scapegoat or the rebel. How would a rebel who's shaking a whole bunch, how does the rebel serve the family? Yep, Aunt Chris.
I just read a couple of heavy books on domestic violence, and it blew my mind, the cycle that takes place and how you look forward to that moment after it's all done, and sometimes you incite the violence to take place, so then you can have some
Be done with it,
connection,
yeah.
be done with it, and so that made me think of that.
Okay, so
This gets me into this.
yes, so the rebel maybe, okay, we know this is going to be a disaster tonight over the next 3 hours. I might as well throw the ashtray myself, get slapped across the face, be yelled at, so that we can just get on with it. So that's why the rebel often is called the scapegoat. Scapegoat, you know that biblical term from the Old Testament? So we not only have the perfect lamb, that was the sacrifice lamb that someday would be Jesus, the sacrifice lamb. You also had the scapegoat, where all the sins once a year, I think it was, of the children of Israel would be placed on this goat or this lamb or whatever, and sent out in the wilderness to carry all the sins of the people. So sometimes we have a family member who is that sacrificed lamb, scapegoated, so that the family can stay in denial going, yeah, but it's been pretty stressful. Johnny, he's been cutting class. It understandably gets Dad angry, and no one's really talking about the real problem. Interestingly, in my world, the all-star is not brought to therapy. Okay? Very often, the rebel is brought to therapy. Sometimes, like, he's dropped off while the car's still running, practically. If you kind of get the picture. There very often is there's a lot going on with Johnny. He pulled the fire alarm. His grades have plummeted. But what's going on for Johnny? Remember that little part in here? What's going on in his heart that's working its way out in all this shaking, and what's going on in his family that is playing some role in how his heart is doing. So very often, interestingly, if all goes well with family therapy, there's been points in time where me and the rebel have our little secret handshake. And I thank him that his heart felt enough to end up in my office to somehow make a fuss enough because his system knew something was dysfunctioning. Now, the way he expressed it was by dysfunctioning. He couldn't identify it, but thank God he was in touch enough with his own heart to go a little spazzy, because that's, as much as that's dangerous and dysfunctional and you can take drugs and all kinds of things can happen that complicate it, but very often there's sometimes more hope for the rebel than the lost child who just, I'll stay silent, just tell me how many years I have to be on the planet. So it's interesting how we view health and how we view sickness and what shows up and what doesn't. All of these little sweethearts have this heart that's dying to be a person and to live, not just survive. And that somewhere in this process, they're meant to discover living mode, not survival mode. Somewhere in this process, they're meant to discover what boundaries are, and that they're not just here to carry someone else's load, because guess what? What kind of boundary lesson did they learn when it comes to what they carry? They carry mom's mood, they carry dad's drinking, they carry younger sisters crying at night, whatever. You see all these arrows going everywhere when it comes to the confusion around what's mine to carry, what's not. President.
I feel like I can relate to those kids in the system I grew up, which is very healthy.
Right.
I didn't have an alcoholic parent.
Right.
But I still feel like,
Some roles got taken on.
yeah, without
Yeah.
that example, do you feel like most kids find themselves in one of those roles?
Right, so how common are the roles? How much does the family have to shake for the roles to be taken on? We also say we don't just stay in one role. Sometimes we're in one role in one kind of setting and a different role in another kind of setting. We say this whole spectrum of intensity, from 0 to 100. Question, I'm going to answer your question. Yeah. So the only child, interestingly, then we'd say, what kind of survival role do they take on? It's not uncommon, they take on a very internal survival role. They go into a cave no one knows they go into, right? But it's the right kind of question as far as, what does a child do? Where do they go, right? Now remember, we're talking about well-being. Now to address this question, we'd say it's common to take on roles, and then certain personalities tend to be the mascot, and some personalities tend to be the all-star. Let me make a couple comments about that. One of the things we'd say, and I'm trying to remember what week we talked about it, but we talked about worthiness, where we get our sense of worthiness. The thing we keep in mind, if your family shook a lot, or your family shook a little, the thing we want to keep in mind is, do I find my identity in my role? So what happens if I find my identity in my role? Now here I said person versus role. Or we could say true self versus role. Remember I was saying the all-star isn't brought into therapy very often? Guess when they go to therapy? When they're my age. So the all-star did great in childhood because he was popular, good-looking, charming, and could play everything and pass every class. Junior high went super great. High school, now we're doing some making out. That goes well for the all-star. Like, you live large. How great is life? You're in high school, you're making out, you're on the football team. Not bad. All of that leads to a pretty good college. Pretty good college, you meet a nice girl. No problem with the all-star yet. Now remember, what we're saying about these characteristics might be okay, but when your sense of self is defined by being an all-star, then when you're laid off, when the college sweetheart leaves you, when all the hair on your head goes somewhere else, all of those kinds of things that were all-star traits start to diminish. You don't get the promotion. Then all-star is shocked with panic attacks or depression because their well-being was wrapped in what they did. They became a human doing and didn't know there was this thing called human being. And that is a very common mood disorder. And this would be a work. So typically, this all-star grows up, perhaps, to be the workaholic. He may say, I'm not going to be an alcoholic, but my value is in what I do. That's where I got affirmed the whole time. I'll be a workaholic. And now the next generation doesn't have an alcoholic dad, but oh, what do you know? My workaholic dad is unavailable. There's no time to talk, trust, and feel, so we can actually repeat patterns even if we think we're changing. Okay? So, now the lost child. How does a lost child grow up and do relationships? I alluded to it already, yeah.
Often, my day, we lost child when we dealt with my own sister. I was the lost child, but there was an integration of the masculine, capable, rebel, lost child, all mixed up in me. But I looked to my older sister to role model myself after her. And yeah, she felt respect back and so everything you said.
Okay.
Right, so that was the dynamic in my family. And my mother remained the chaste wife, right? But the father was wrong.
Yeah.
Alcoholism and everything he could.
Okay.
So she protected the family.
Right. So you have these roles being taken on, and even as a child in a family in birth order, where do I take my cues? And we can also say, sometimes we have an all-star or a lost child or a mascot in elementary school, and then throw little hormones in there in adolescence, and now they're the rebel. Like, whoa, that's the same kid. And then they're shamed. Oh, we liked it when you were the nice kid.
And I think the other thing that happens is the lost child, is she'll marry someone like her father, because it's comfortable.
Right, so we're going to run out of time, but if we went to all of their weddings, we'd be curious, like, who did all these kids marry?
Yeah.
See, and that's when we get into responsible to and responsible for, and the chemistry, and what's comfortable, and like, oh, I love this guy I fell in love with. Oh yeah, he has a little bit of a temper. I like a little fire in his personality. And they do this like denial version of what they're heading into, or whatever, right? So it's so thought-provoking, and I really appreciate what you're sharing to say, we're really meant to reflect on what happened in my family system. Now let's keep in mind that when we think about the shaking system, the child's sense, or everybody's sense of well-being is typically focused here. How are you doing? Oh, pretty good today. Dad's not home yet from work, or he's not drinking today. So think about these arrows, right? All my well-being is going outward. Remember what we said about that? So I think I even have a slide on that. Family shake a system. What else could be true about a dad or a mom? With illness, yeah. So sometimes, again, not only is the illness kind of shaking things up, but it could be like, what are you thinking? Mom's sleeping. And then the kid gets shut down. Or they're punished for giggling. Don't you know what she's going through? Uh-oh, now I feel bad about having the giggles. Yeah. So what else could show up in a family that's not textbook alcoholic? Okay. Okay, so you could have just, but I don't want that going on here. Between that, you could have like a conflict that's not resolved here, that simply is the Bickersons that shakes the family, and the kids know, hunker down, let's let the storm pass. And very often, again, when it comes to what am I responsible for, it could be that someone acts out and they end up feeling responsible for their parents fighting. Talk about a boundary mix up on what goes in their backpack and what doesn't. Okay? So as we think about this, Let me think what else I want us to think about and know. Oh, now, take a peek on the back of your handout. You see it here, you see it on your page. I want us to take a look at that. I want you to review that over the week, but take a peek here at what's going on. Regardless of, we might look at the mascot, his wall of defense is to attract attention or humor or hyperactivity, flirting, being super cute. Look at the feelings inside. Remember that little red little heart that got crossed out? Way down deep in the person is feelings of fear, insecurity, confusion. We have the lost child, the wall of defense is distance or quietness, withdrawn, aloofness, or being super independent. They don't need anything. They don't want to bother anyone. But inside they're lonely and hurt and feeling inadequate. The all-star, his wall of success is super responsibility. Work hard for approval, being all together, never having a problem. But inside he feels lonely and inadequate. The scapegoat, he might have chemical dependency as a wall of defense. He might be just all withdrawn. He might have just want to hang out with his friends all the time and be away from that family. Defiance, and yet inside lonely and angry and hurt and feels rejected. And so I want us to almost appreciate that if we think about this phenomenon when it then comes to how that confuses our boundaries, and it confuses how we show up, and it confuses even our sense of how to be in a relationship. What we covered tonight is really kind of, some vulnerable stuff, and you guys did great with it. But I want us to appreciate our own story, not so we wallow in it, we're not looking back to dig it up, but sometimes in order to move forward, we have to be in touch with our own story. Like, where is my story? If my story were drawn out here, what's my story? How do I feel about my story? Because it's kind of unfortunate that it would happen this way. You know what's more unfortunate than that even? That I would never realize that I could talk, trust, and feel. That I would never realize that I had the right to be a person. That I would never realize that when it comes to this boundary discovery that I could really get a sense of like, back to my radar, what do I really feel? What's going on inside of me? I mean, I can speak up. Or it could be that not only do I speak up, and next week we're going to talk about different profiles like controlling personalities and compliant personalities. So speaking up is one thing, or some of us might have issues that when we do speak up, we have to be super angry. Like, I'm not going to speak up unless you tick me off enough, and then look out, dragon fire comes out of my mouth, and then I'll tell you what I feel. Kind of volcano mode. So we want to get a sense of, almost like we're going to take a collective breath. Now, we keep in mind, and we'll wrap it up with this, that our journey back home, and it's so killer that Lent is coming up. And anybody who doesn't go to church here, I would say you're showing up at totally the right time, because Lent is coming up. And Lent, this whole great Lent, is meant to be, the whole image of it is the parable of the prodigal son. Like, I don't know how I ended up in the pig pen, but it says, in English it sometimes says he came to his senses, and then he turned toward the Father. The actual words say, when he came to himself, he turned toward the Father. And we know how that he returns back to his true home. This process that we're talking about, this boundary work, is so we come to ourselves. We're in whatever trench we're in, we're in whatever pothole we're in, wherever we are, whatever causes this like, whoa, I'm realizing something, I'm coming to myself, some parts of me, as the parable says, have been in a foreign land. Like, sometimes a part of us has been far away from us. And this idea of Great Lent is so consistent with we're really given permission to really reflect, where have I been? I'm invited back home to my true calling. My true calling is to be a person. Now, what we can also say, thank God, is our true personhood is found through our connection with the life giver. We find life from our source of life. As we said, when we find the gates of the heart, that's when we find the gates of the kingdom of heaven. So Great Lent is it might be familiar for a lot of people. And we kind of know what we do, we kind of know what Sundays do fun, and we got the fuck yes out, we have our little things. But oh my gosh, Great Lent has everything to do with what we're talking about today. I get to go home. I get to leave this foreign land of people pleasing. I get to leave this foreign land of trying to get my fix of feeling good about myself by running around and whatever I do to feel good about myself. I get to come back to my heart and connect my heart with the heart of God. So wherever you're at, remember our series title of the whole series is called Life from the Heart series. Great Lent, if it's not from the heart, is a pain in the you-know-what. If you're not in your heart and you try to observe Lent, it can get depressing. Certainly inconvenient. You can hardly eat anything. You get irritable, and it's more like God, more irritable with that. So it can be hard. So if we don't see the heart of the journey, then it's like, okay, how many hoops do I have to jump through? For how many days? Right? I mean, so we can like literally miss Great Lent because we're doing it in an external way. We're being called back home to our hearts. So whatever you're going to do with Great Lent, and whatever you do with this boundary journey, it's really about finding your heart, finding your voice, finding your pulse. And I mentioned to you, I think the first week, I can't remember if I mentioned this the first week, or I mentioned this when I came out to talk about family wellness. But I'll close with this. I read in an awesome book, and I've read my little prayer book that's based on the Jesus Prayer. This book is all about the Jesus Prayer. And there's zillions of Christians on the planet who've never heard the Jesus Prayer. So it's really fascinating, this one little book that this anonymous author wrote, this peasant in Russia wrote, called The Way of the Pilgrim. Super cool book. And he discovers the Jesus Prayer. And the short version is, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. So even in the midst of whatever storm we're in, the inner life gets to have a whole lot of freedom and a whole lot of space by the humble prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. So I want to close this because I'm talking about finding our hearts. What this author, this unknown author, writes in The Way of the Pilgrim, in one little part, he writes, he did this himself, find your pulse. So let's try to do that. Can you guys do that on your wrist? Can you find your pulse? Does that work for you guys? Some people can and some people can't. I feel mine. You guys, did you get a little pulse in there? So the idea is that with the beating of your heart, or beating of your pulse, is each word, and sometimes two words. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. All your pulse there. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. I wouldn't mind. You know what was a great picture in my mind? See you guys tune into your pulse. That's great. You know why that's great for me? To me, that means you're tuning into your own heartbeat. That's the point I want to end on. When we align our own heartbeat, that sometimes we don't even tune into, let alone tune into anything in our inner life. Tune into your own heartbeat using those words. There's something to that. Now, you're going to tell me, maybe next week or sometime, what that has meant for you if you want to try that. But this whole journey and this whole boundaries really is about finding your pulse. Find out where you are when we come to ourselves. And as the scriptures say, when he came to himself, he turned to the Father. So with that, I'll close our time. Thank you for your good attention. Father.
Thank you. you, George, and thank you everyone again for being here, and we'll resume again next week, and God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening.